All right, I just started recording.
Okay.
So welcome everybody to the fourth installment of Conservation from the Couch. This is all about tarpon, permit, and bonefish, brought to you by the American Fly Fishing Trade Association. My name is Ben Bulis. I'm the president of the American Fly Fishing Trade Association, and also brought to you by Brian Bennett with Moldy Chum. We also would like to thank the supporters of this, and I'll name just go through those quickly here. Midcurrent, Rio Products, Orvis, 12 Weight, The Drake, Emerger Strategies, Sims Fishing Products, Row Drift Boats, Cheeky Reels, Hatch Magazine, Scientific Anglers, Flywater Travel, Reddington, Fish Pond, Scott Fly Rods, Thomas & Thomas Fly Rods, the Fiberglass Manifesto, High Street Strategies, Allen Fly Fishing, Yellow Dog Fishing Adventures, Patagonia, The Sustainable Angler, Gink and Gasoline, Rep Your Water, Umpqua, Nautilus Reels, and Sage. So thank you to all those folks. And Brian, you got anything you want to say?
Yeah, just super stoked on this one. A little bittersweet. I'm stoked because of the crew we've got on tonight. The pre-call was pretty awesome, so I'm really looking forward to this. It's some really interesting stuff I think we're going to talk about. And also, just this is the last one, so we don't know what this looks like moving forward. We think it might have some life beyond, the pandemic. And so, kind of everything's kind of loose and fancy-free now because this is the last one. So I think we're gonna have some real fun tonight. So I'm really looking forward to this one.
We got a couple others. We got a couple others in the works.
Yes, there are some in the works.
What?
So we are in the midst. So we will be having meetings about those real soon.
Oh, okay. Keep me in the dark. I'm just a
the
mushroom.
last one in this series is the way that we'll say it.
Just a mushroom. Okay.
You're not the mushroom, Brian. So, all right, well, good. Then let's kick this bad boy off. As usual, I will introduce this thing. We are here for our fourth installment, as everyone has said. We are here with folks from BTT, or the Bonefish and Tarpon Trust. We have a couple guys here who know a whole lot about fish, and then Mark Raven. So, just kidding, Mark. I'm talking to your stash.
Yeah.
Oh, you have the cup.
The cup's invisible right now.
Right, it's in the green screen. So as everyone has probably seen, if you've tuned into these before, this was sort of a brainchild of mine and Paul Moynister. We decided to try to bring people together from around the country to talk about conservation and stuff that they could do from their couch. And so that is why we are all, or most of us at least, are on our couches talking about conservation. And just as thrilled tonight as we always are to have folks on and to cover a different part of the country, because as we say on all of these, that there is a connective thread that exists between all of us, and it is conservation. It is working on issues within our fisheries, and that even though we may be geographically far apart, we are all in this together, and that you realize that we're a lot closer than we think. So in the spirit of conservation from the couch, I will start this off with a bit of a joke.
Well, you want to introduce our panelists real fast?
No, I don't.
All right.
Yeah, go ahead, guys. Sorry.
Great comedic relief already. I mean, come
I
on.
know. Trying to get it out
What
there
ends
quick.
up happening is Lucas tells everybody who they are and then never lets them introduce themselves. And then we get halfway through and they're like, oh, do you want to tell us about yourselves? And we're like 30 minutes in.
No, I didn't. I was not going to do that this time.
All right. I just wanted to stop you before we got there. So.
Okay. Well,
And
let's let everyone introduce.
1 second too. Lucas, I'm going to make you the host because we've got a huge thunderstorm coming through.
Okay.
And the last thing I want is this to die, and hopefully it still records and sends it to my computer for later.
All right. So let's do that then. Let's do introductions. And so we'll start with Aaron Adams. If
I
you
thought
would.
you were going to go with stash before beauty, but go on.
No, when Mark goes, he can tell us about his favorite bait for bonefish and hermit.
Perfect.
Is it live shrimp or frozen shrimp, Mark?
At the same time. He actually uses one of each on the same hook. So anyway.
I will text you, actually.
So-
That's my trip.
All right, so we're
Um,
failing at introductions.
All right, I'll try to get this started. I am Director of Science and Conservation for Bonefish Tarpon Trust. I've been with the BTT first as just a biologist doing research since 2003, then Director 06 to what, 09 or so, and then Director of Science for the past 8 years or so. So my job with BTT is to kind of formulate our science and conservation strategy, and then to work with our own scientists and then external scientists like Andy and others to formulate and conduct research. And one thing that's unique about BTT is everything we do research-wise has a specific management or conservation purpose. So we're actually getting data that is applied directly to management. We'll talk about some details of that tonight. And when I'm not doing that, I'm fishing as much as possible.
Awesome. Andy?
Yeah, my name's Andy Danilchuk. I'm a professor at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst, and I'm also a BTT research fellow. Been working on bonefish, flat species since about 2000, when I moved to the Turks and Caicos Islands. Fell in love with them there and never looked back, but was also quite blown away as a scientist at the void of research papers and quantifiable studies that were done on bonefish and tarpon and permit at that time, and sort of steered my career in that direction, among working on other species. But other background, I mean, my professional day job, I teach at UMass. I've got research projects pretty much around the world, working on various species, but a majority of what I do focuses on flat species, tarpon, bonefish, permit, and then GTs. Got a project right now on the Seychelles, focusing on GTs. So, and a really good mix of looking at movement patterns, and lots of other stuff. Yeah. Okay. I'll leave it there.
No, I was gonna say, if you want to like fish a lot, you want to be a fish scientist.
Yeah, you're like, yeah, so now I got to go to the
If I had to do it all
Seychelles.
over again, that's what I would be doing. Seriously.
Believe it or not, though, I wish I would fish a heck of a lot more when I'm doing the research.
Sure.
It's usually I'm tagging along with guides or anglers. I do,
True or false question. Do you get paid to go to the Seychelles?
do I get paid? Well, I get paid. I get paid my day job through the university.
Yeah.
Oh, maybe it's, do you have to pay to go to the Seychelles?
Do I have to pay to go to the Seychelles? Well, depends on how you define pay.
All right, Bill
That
Clinton.
is that
All right,
is
Bill Clinton, we got it.
Depends on what the definition is kind of answer. to that
Exactly.
question.
But the one thing I additionally do want to piggyback on something that Aaron said. When I moved to the Turks and Caicos Islands and stumbled across bonefish, and was completely blown away as an angler. How these really powerful fish live in super skinny water. They're benthivores, right? They feed on the bottom. It's like a bottom feeder, right? And I was like, holy crap, these things are amazing. And when I started to realize there wasn't a lot of research going on about bonefish, I reached out. It was back in the day, when not long after BTT started, and I reached out and realized that, wow, there's this not-for-profit that's actually funding science, right? Which is pretty rare. I mean, there's a lot of not-for-profits that fund, parts of science, but not the entire big scientific studies. And they tie that into, the advocacy that they do, and thinking about how that fits into management. And so, I've kind of been connected with BTT for quite some time, and I've been really kind of impressed in terms of how they turn, the science into action, and use that as a positive way to affect change. So I think it's a rare thing to see, and it's empowering. So it's I've been pretty proud to be involved with the organization, and you know, and I think that they kind of raise a pretty high bar by doing what they do. So
For sure.
Awesome. And then last and certainly least, I mean, not least, sorry.
I'm just gonna go.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's been real, guys. Thank you. You know, no thank you. I don't know.
Sorry, Mark. Sorry. Love
Mark
you, buddy.
Rabine. I'm the director of development here at BTT. I oversee fundraising to keep Aaron and Andy as busy as we can. I've now been in June. I'll be here 6 years. You know, it's been really fun to watch it in my time here come from working in somebody's backyard to you know, having an office and becoming a absolute powerhouse in terms of fisheries conservation. And the quality of people we work with and the quality of people that I've been fortunate enough to meet through my job that are, you know, that make up our support base has really made my life pretty good. So Andy gets to go to the Seychelles, but I get to hang out with pretty good people, and I don't have it all that bad. I do have to spend time with Aaron, so there is that. But you know, I think we get along. As far as my background goes, you know, lifelong fisherman. I see my dad is on the attendees list here. So Dad, thank you for helping me catch my first bonefish when I was about, I think, 11 or 12 in Exuma, because it's now a full-fledged addiction that is way more expensive than using hardcore drugs. So, you know, this whole fishing thing has gotten really out of hand, and now I'm here. So thank you for starting me on that path. And you know, I'm just really fortunate to be here. You know, it's we've got a lot of great things going on.
question for you, Mark. How do you know that?
Sorry?
How do you know that?
Know what?
About the hardcore drugs, I assume you mean.
Oh, I don't know. Great question.
He's asking for a
Aaron
friend.
told me about it. He said they're expensive.
Oh, boy. Okay. I
I
thought this
have
was
a
going to be the
question,
most
though.
serious. I was
I
wrong.
need to know about the Zoom background. Because that one.
All right, I forgot to get into that. So, you know,
Yeah.
for those of you who are, you know, tuning in tonight, I've been catching a lot of crap because I have a COVID mustache. I usually don't grow a COVID mustache.
Usually.
Well, usually there's not COVID going on, so it's usually just a regular mustache. And what happened was I was perusing the internet today, and I just so happened to come across this wonderful post from the American Museum of Fly Fishing. And we have one of the pioneers of fly fishing here, a guy by the name of A.W. Dimmock. And if you look, there's a tarpon that has sunk his canoe because it jumped through it. And look at the fine facial hair that he has.
Gosh.
Also, great mustache guy. Great mustache guy.
If I would have known what we were going to have as a panel here, we could have just framed it as the scientists and the stash as opposed to bonefish tarpon. So I'm a little disappointed
Lost
that we
opportunity.
didn't know about
Never
that
get that
going
back
into
now.
this. Yeah.
I just thought of a new term for a mustache. I think I'm going to start calling it a lip wreath. That's what I'm going to say, is that's a pretty nice lip wreath. You know, like the old Christmas wreath there. All right. So I normally start off with a joke, but I feel like this whole thing has been a joke. So I don't know that we need to. I typically ask funny stories or ask people to tell funny stories. And I give a little bit of something that's been happening to me here in quarantine. I do have a little story, and I'll tell it. And so if anyone has something afterwards, please feel free. I think we could spend most of the night on Mark's mustache, but you know, if we need to, we know we have that cannon fodder.
Yeah, my biggest concern is that, you know, they tell you not to touch your face. Like, that's a big part of coronavirus safety. And as I just watch him, he's just twiddling the mustache. It's like,
You just had a Moscow Mule
Hey,
delivered there, Ben?
I live in Miami. Like, we've already gotten it twice. I mean, we're good. We're in Rona town.
I'm gonna just not touch that one and pitch it back to
wow, y'all got me all flustered. So, you know, I've been locked down now for over 2 months with the kid. I always ask, what have you done that you normally wouldn't do in the last 2 months? And for me, it's been become a school teacher, like a lot of folks out there. My son has recently slipped into 3rd grade math, even though he's in 2nd grade. They decided to throw a little 3rd grade in there. So we're doing some geometry, doing a little chart plotting, which is cool because it's data, kind of stuff that we're talking about. He's just about at the top of my ability. So we're almost out. So once we get out of third grade, I'm done. I know that for sure. It's something that I've realized doing this is that, you know, it's tough. And so there's been a lot of crying. There's been a lot of tantrums thrown. You know, there's been a lot of whining. And the worst part of all of it is that my son doesn't respect me because I keep doing all of that. So, you know, that's my joke for today. That one landed a little flatter than I thought.
I thought it was funny, Lucas. That was good.
Thank you, Mike.
I had to go out and pull my bumper sticker off my car that said my kid is an honor student.
Is it just because you have tougher standards in the school, or is he no longer being taught the right way? So anyway, that's my latest quarantine story. Anybody else have anything they've done unusual in the last 2 months that they typically wouldn't do? We know that Mark has grown a stash. We have that.
We established that pretty early.
Andy, have you been teaching the kids? I mean, you're a professor by trade. How is teaching kids versus teaching students?
Yeah, it's brutal. Yeah, you can't mute them, because I mean, I had to convert to remote teaching. I was teaching a class at UMass on field logistics and expeditionary science, which is pretty cool. A lot of hands-on stuff, and I had to convert to Zoom and everything, and it was fine. You know, it was doable. But the homeschooling has been a challenge, I think, because of differences in expectations. I think a lot of the teachers didn't know what the heck to do, so they just dumped a whole bunch of crap on the internet and said, "Here, kids, do all this stuff." And my kids looked at it and were freaked out, and this is more than they'd do an entire semester. So I think we're finally getting into a bit of a groove. But with Lucas, I mean, I think that the tears and frustration go both ways. I think it's been challenging, but it's also been rewarding. I think that super grateful to have the opportunity to, rather than, see my kids at the end of the day and be let's go for a mountain bike ride. Trails are still open here. And we can get to local streams and all sorts of stuff. So it's nice to be able to do that and go hang out with them. So I always try to look for the silver lining. So
awesome.
As long as the silver lining doesn't become the silver bullet, you're good to go.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens in the fall, though. I think there's a pretty good likelihood that at least UMass will be remote teaching. So I'll be doing that again. And I've got one big course in the fall. Trying to do that and seeing what happens with my kids' schools. My son's going into middle school, so it's a big transition, and I hope he actually can physically do that, because I think it's an important one. But we'll figure it out. So.
Yeah.
Lucas,
awesome.
I am happy to report that the with everybody off of the water and all the ramps here closed in Miami, the wild jet ski population has still remained really strong and is really thriving down here. And it's just been absolutely beautiful to see. They're just such majestic creatures.
When you see,
wanted to throw that in there for you.
When you see jet skis in their natural habitat, it's
kind of like the inner tube hatch.
It's unlike anything else.
Beautiful. Brings a tear to my eye every time.
Whew, man, this is going to be a long one.
Well, do you want to, Lucas, you want to go ahead and get into bonefish tarpon love, or do you want to just stick with the coronavirus? Because that was an open in there. I don't want to skip around too much on the agenda.
I mean, yeah, if we want to briefly touch on something that may be positive or, negative from coronavirus, obviously that's something that we've all dealt with. I feel like Andy had a really good positive there. It wasn't really fishing related, although it can be if you and your kids are getting out fishing. And I think that's extremely important. I know that I have spent a lot more quality time with my family than I ever would have, and that has made our bond much stronger. And so that's definitely a positive from all of this. But, fisheries wise, specifically, tarpon, bonefish, and permit, is there anything that we'd be, good to report because of Corona or worrisome things?
I think they're getting a considerable decrease in pressure from previous years. And without the bad news, of course, on that is the guides aren't working.
Right.
But the good news from the fish's perspective is they're not seeing many anglers or boats. And some of the fishing I've done around here, there's a lot of boat traffic, people out kind of joyriding around, but not ton of fishing, again, because of the guides, and the fish are a lot more relaxed, a lot more approachable, a lot more likely to eat. Reports we're getting from the Keys and Southwest Florida are pretty damn good.
Yeah.
As far as number of eats, and not just seeing the fish, but the fish not bouncing off of 20 boats, for example. Same from the Bahamas. Some friends, colleagues who are fishing out there, the fish are what we like, pretty stupid. In the Bahamas, typically the lodges shut down for the summer. It just gets too warm for people, but also for the fish on the flats. And so if you go to a lodge right when it opens, say in late October, you tend to get fish that forgot about all the anglers they saw in the spring. And it's in that kind of situation now, from what I've been told over there. So in that sense, that's a positive. They're probably forgetting a lot. So when we first get back to them, there'll be a lot of stupid fish around, which is good. Right, Mark?
My favorite kind. I can't speak to a fisheries note, but I can speak to sort of the vibe around the fishing industry. And, as an organization that is working to put on a large scale symposium this fall, it's really tough. You're kind of making calls and checking in with people. And obviously we've been in it and around enough. We kind of have friends at different companies and groups, and it's been extremely frustrating just to hear that people aren't doing well. And, the flow of money is just not flowing at all. And, people are being furloughed. Guides aren't able to book days. I mean, Lucas, you can probably attest to this better than all of us. It's just really tough out there. And, we definitely feel for all of those who have been affected by this. And, it's just, hopefully the end is in sight here, knock on wood. But, it's just been really sad to hear about friends and colleagues losing jobs and stuff like that. So that's definitely been a bummer. So hopefully we can see some positives from the fishery, and hopefully, people have been crammed inside long enough that once they get out, they're going to book all their guide days, as many as they can, and buy all the gear that they can get and support all the local shops that they can. But, for now it's been really tough out there. So.
Yeah. Sorry to hear that, but it's good to know that the fish are at least getting a break during these times, and hopefully things will pick back up here soon. So kind of getting into the kind of conservation, meat of the story here, I'd be really curious to, just get kind of a general overview. I mean, part of my excitement about this event tonight is that, I know a bit about bonefish, I know a bit about tarpon and permit. We hear a lot of stories about specific threats and things that are happening as far as habitat loss or Lake Okeechobee, this or that. But it'd be great maybe to kind of ground this conversation perhaps in just like a bit of a top line overview of like, what is the state, if you had to stand up and do the state of the fisheries, like how are things going? What are the populations looking like? Like we know that there are challenges. We know there's also bright spots, but, just kind of from a 30,000 foot level, how good is the situation? How bad is the situation for these species?
That's a really good question. What do I have, Lucas? About 30 minutes?
Yep.
The whole time. Just take the rest of the show.
Timer up there. Is there any way we can do that?
Hang on, I got to go bake some cookies.
There you go.
I think
Set your timer by Aaron's answer.
We should give everybody an hourglass for this thing, and you can turn it over and then watch the sand pour.
Set your timer by Aaron's answer, but higher altitudes, it may take less time.
I think a lot depends on where you are. BTT was started in 1998 because anglers and guides saw a decline in the bonefish and tarpon population, noticeable. Just recently, we worked with some colleagues at Florida International University, and they did a series of intensive interviews and surveys with longtime guides and anglers in the Keys going back to the 70s, and were able to track the decline, which really took a hit late 80s, a couple times in the 90s, and then again, a big one with that the cold kill in 2010. The good news on that side of things is that in recent years, past maybe 3-4 years, we've had new year classes of fish come in. And we're not quite sure where they're coming from, but guides and anglers are reporting, fish. She's a couple of years ago, 10-inch bonefish, which they hadn't seen in a long time. The old timers talked about seeing house muds of small bonefish that they'd use to get their numbers up for a tournament and then go look for their weight fish, and they're seeing those again. So it's likely, based on some of the work we've done, that those larvae coming into the Keys are coming from Southwest Cuba, Belize, and Mexico, all of which have improved their conservation in the past 8 or 9 years, Ascension Bay going back 15 years. So a decline and increase, but we still have to figure out exactly what's going on with those populations. With tarpon, big picture long term, there appear to be fewer than there were, and Andy can talk to this, some of that could be a redistribution because of climate change. And I'll circle back to Andy here in a second, but real quick on permit, we've become concerned with permit in the past 5-6 years because of reports from guides and anglers about a notable decline in numbers and size. And so that's why we're pushing for a closure of fishing on the spawning aggregation of Western dry rocks. And if you go to btt.org, right there on our front page, you can sign a petition that goes to Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission to get them to close that. But maybe Andy can jump in on some of that tarpon redistribution stuff with the movement data.
Yeah, for sure. I think we've learned a lot in the last 4 or 5 years. Starting in 2016, we ETT funded a pretty extensive tarpon tracking program in the southeastern United States using acoustic telemetry, which I, strangely enough, have one of these tags in my home office, believe it or not.
Hey.
Size of a AA, a little bit bigger than a AA battery. And what's cool about these, you surgically implant them inside the tarpon. So they're not being lost, they're not being shed. And these things got a 5-year battery life. And so we've started in 2016 and we're up to over 170 tagged fish. And yes, so Ben just pulled up this sort of a summary showing a lot of the movement patterns of tarpon. This is just a GIF that's on the BTT website. It's kind of a culmination of our work to date. And what's nice about the acoustic telemetry, because of the transmitters are so small, we're able to put them in fish that are 20, 30 pounds and upwards to the big beasts. And so we're discovering and showing that because we're able to track the same individual from year to year to year, that we see repeated movement patterns, and we see them going pretty far up the eastern seaboard. We've had some fish detected as far north as the Chesapeake and off of Virginia. And we've had some that were tagged in the Keys or tagged in Charlotte Harbor that went all the way around the Keys and back up. And so, we're seeing, and we're seeing their distribution change. We're seeing it much broader than what we would have anticipated. Although there were, historical fisheries, small fisheries for tarpon in, places like the Carolinas, and, there's some little people have targeted tarpon further north back in the day. It's becoming more frequent. And it's not just the big fish that are moving. We've got one fish that was tagged in the Keys in 2016. It was like a 50-pound fish. And that's the one that we're tracking them for, over 1,000 days, and they're going all the way up to the Chesapeake.
Wow.
So it's not just the beasts that are moving. And I think what's important about this in terms of evidence related to understanding the movement patterns and how this cascades into, ultimately their management, is that because of the technology, we're tracking the same individual. We're creating a story based on the movement patterns of the same individuals over time. It's not like we're piecing together patterns based on the movements of multiple individuals, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's, I think, the strength of this technology. And I think that, I think we talked about this on, on the pre-call, that it might be opening fisheries up in other parts of the United States. But that might be, changing the fishery, in the Keys and other places. So, and that ties into climate change. And we also have to think about how that is connected to the prey base, right? So we think they're moving north to follow the mullet and menhaden, and then coming down later or in the spring to go and spawn, off of in the Keys or Charlotte Harbor area. So thinking about their life history is important from that movement perspective. But then other stuff that BTT has been doing, some other scientists, John Shanker and folks, and been looking at juvenile habitat, and understanding that complete picture. That's kind of the thing that I've done all my life. Right? My professional career has looked at the life history of fish from what happens from the time they are born to the time that they die. And I think that, based on what we're learning from the acoustic telemetry and some of the other things that BTT has been studying, we are developing that more complete picture, and we are seeing changes. And some of it might also coincide with decreases in tarpon in the Keys, for instance.
Andy, we got a question came in about something that's just kind of relevant to this. Is there a certain size when tarpon begin to become migratory?
Yeah, so we put some transmitters in, some of these transmitters into 20 or 30 pound tarpon, and they've been moving. But the flip side of that is we have some individuals that move a lot and that some individuals that don't. And we see that consistently with other fish species too. So we can't always think that the entire population is doing the same thing. I think that's also been the benefit. Like previous tarpon tagging studies have been using satellite tags, and they're super big, and you can only put them on fish that are 100 pounds plus.
Huge, yeah.
So we've been able to answer a lot more questions with this technology. So.
And then Mike just came in with another question, was probably relevant as well, which is, what about the Western migration? So you can probably see that question. So why don't you grab that one?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Hey, Mike. And so there's some evidence that there's a dividing line at Louisiana, that a lot of the tarpon or almost all the tarpon that we've tagged between, northern Florida, the Keys, the Carolinas, everything, they really don't go much further past, Alabama, Mississippi. And then BTT started tagging tarpon in Texas, and the fish that they've been tracking so far, they've been going the other way towards Mexico. So there is that divide. But I think it will be important though to, for that other group of fish between Louisiana and Mexico, to tag a wide size range of fish, just like we've been doing in the other part of the Gulf of Mexico and the southeastern United States. Because I think that provides that much more comprehensive picture in terms of what the population's up to.
And another aspect to think about too is it's not just the adults moving, right? When they go offshore to spawn, so those big schools of fish, people fish for on the Channel and the Keys, or Boca Grande, Charlotte Harbor, we call those pre-spawning aggregations. And they're not actually spawning there. They get together in groups and they go offshore to spawn. So when the fish spawn, say 120 miles off the west coast of Florida, those larvae that hatch from the eggs drift around for about a month. They can end up just about anywhere. Our colleague John Shanker did a study and found that larvae that were spawned in the Gulf of Mexico ended up coming into Indian River Lagoon on the east coast of Florida. So it's the adults, but it's also the larvae that they spawn. And John also found that a spawning location appears to be where the Deepwater Horizon spill was. He found veiled larvae there. And again, they can be transported throughout the region in 30 days pretty easily. So it's a bit more complex, but we're learning a lot more on that.
Well, that's actually a really good transition to the next question that we wanted to ask, Aaron, is, how does habitat and the loss thereof play into the life cycle of these fish?
From BTT's perspective, it's the habitat that's the biggest priority. Bonefish, tarpon, and permit. Bonefish and permit are managed in Florida at the state level. Of course, they occur throughout the Caribbean, and they're all managed locally. There's really no regional management plan. And the common threat to them throughout the region is habitat loss and degradation. For tarpon, it's the biggest concern is juvenile habitats. Small tarpon, say from 12 inches down, require mucky, stinky backwater mangrove swamps. If it's got mosquitoes and you sink up to your neck in mud, that's perfect for juvenile tarpon. When they're that small, they don't need any oxygen in the water. They can get all their oxygen from gulping at the surface. So that keeps big predators like snook, other tarpon, redfish out of there. Their biggest predators are wading birds like blue herons, wood storks, that type of thing. And so our big concern in Florida is we've already lost around 50% of the mangroves from pre-development times. I mean, remember 100 years ago, Miami wasn't there. That all used to be mangrove swamp. And so to the extent that the amount of juvenile habitat limits population size, even if we stopped everything, all fishing for tarpon, all mortality of tarpon, we'll never get back to what the population was, say, 150 years ago, because we don't have as much juvenile habitat. So with that in mind, we're pushing really hard in Florida and elsewhere to protect the habitat we've identified with the state, and then to start really pushing habitat restoration. We've got a bunch of projects ongoing now to try and bump that number back up, because that's the limiting factor. For permit, the biggest concern is protection of spawning fish in Florida, but also juvenile permit, guys that literally about the size of a quarter. They require sandy beaches. And so every time they do beach nourishment in Florida, that pushes back the number of juvenile permit, which is frustrating. And then for bonefish, our biggest concern is protection of the flats, of course, but even more so the spawning locations. And so we're working to identify and protect those.
Right there.
Yeah, there you go. I saw somebody, I'll just follow on with that, Lucas, if it's okay. Somebody asked in the Q&A about how do you tell the difference between a schooling bonefish and a pre-spawning aggregation. Part of it is size. When we talk about pre-spawning aggregation, we're talking, what, Andy, 5, 6, 8,000 fish a lot of the times.
It's like a giant bait ball.
Yeah.
Like imagine it's not in shallow water. It's not just a thin layer of bonefish. It's like a giant mass.
Big tornado. Yeah. And they're not on the flats when they're pre-spawning aggregation. They're in other places, typically protected semi-shallow bays, maybe 10 to 30 feet deep that are near deep water. And then when they go offshore at dusk to spawn, they're going out into thousands of feet deep. And it's typically around the full moon, sometimes around the new, but typically around the full moon between late October and April. So it's all pretty specific. Put it this way, if you're on the flats fishing for bonefish and you see a big school, it's not pre-spawning aggregation. They're going to be somewhere else. And we've got pictures. If you go onto our website, you can find some pictures, or just search bonefish spawning aggregation and you'll find some pretty cool video that Andy took.
And do they spawn every month?
Bonefish will spawn every month from October through April, but not every bonefish spawns every month.
Gotcha.
We've tracked, and Andy, correct me on this, we'll track fish going back maybe 2 or 3 times in a spawning season.
Yeah, that's it.
There you go.
That's that same one.
You all have to have that picture to be part of the organization? Is that like your 1-year gift?
That's not fired, huh?
Club. It's a very special club.
And as you might expect too, when we're doing research with these spawning aggregations, we're super careful. There's a lot of sharks. They know that a lot of bonefish are going to show up. But it's interesting, if there's a lot of bonefish, like 6,000, 8,000 bonefish, we don't see a lot of sharks attacking the fish.
Yeah.
It's just like they're overwhelmed by the sheer numbers. Mm-hmm. We've got some video as well. You can link to on our website that's got drone footage. That's pretty insane.
Yeah.
You see sharks swimming all around, but you don't see them attack the fish.
That's kind of the same story though, like with tarpon and permit, right? That they're pretty vulnerable when they're in their spawning aggregations, or they're pre-spawning aggregations, right? We're like same deal with permit in Western Dry Rocks, same thing with tarpon, you know, under Bahia Hunter Bridge or Boca Grande, right? Like they're all bundled up there, ready to do their thing. And because they're in mass, you know, they're easy to target, and the sharks are there too. You know, and so that you know, that leads to question in terms of, you know, if you have these species that migrate, you know, pretty long distances that all come together to these, you know, very special locations to a certain time of year, you know, that's basically they're producing the seeds for the future of the population, right? So we got to really take note of the evidence that we have that those places are important, that they're there year after year. We have a lot of tracking data for bonefish. We have data for tarpon now and for permit, that they all go to these same locations year after year. And we've seen it for other species that aggregate, like grouper and other things, that, you know, if you fish out those aggregations, you know, they don't last. That population doesn't last, right? Those aggregations disappear, and the population plummets. So it's very, very important.
Just a quick question for you. How often do tarpon spawn?
We don't know.
Yeah.
It appears from looking at some data that a colleague of ours, Kathy Gunden, did, she's with FWC, that they spawn more than once in the year. But we don't know how many times, or if they go back to the same spot, or they try different spots to spawn. We know that bonefish go back to the same spot every time they spawn. And permit appear to as well, but we're not sure about tarpon.
We do have, from the acoustic telemetry data so far, we do have some of the same individuals coming back to, you know, like Bahia Honda, right? So they were tagged there, you know, in, you know, March or April. And we tracked them, you know, up the Eastern Seaboard or up into the Western or Eastern Gulf. And, you know, a year later, they're back to the same spot. You know, so that type of fidelity, you know, leads us to, you know, think that, you know, they're probably coming back to the same location as spawn. So
one of the real sort of connective threads that's tied together a lot of these conversations has been the habitat loss issue. And so, you know, being somebody who lives up in Washington, like our habitat's pretty, you know, there's a lot of causes, you know, but there's some simpler solutions like Snake River dams, and taking out the dams, and you open up a lot of access to habitat. I mean, I imagine a lot of the development that's happened is kind of there for, you know, you're not getting rid of some of these subdivisions, you're not getting rid of, you know, the different resorts or whatever, the city populations that are destroying the habitat. So what does habitat restoration look like down in your neck of the woods, and how does that work?
Well, I think we have to think of habitat restoration. Typically, when we think about habitat restoration, we think about restoring a wetland or an oyster bar. And I call that downstream restoration. We also have to consider about upstream, right? What caused the oysters to die? What caused the seagrass to die? And that's mostly upstream causes. So Florida's a good example. No, we're not going to get rid of all the developments and whatnot, but take the Everglades, for example. The Everglades watershed now starts all the way up in Orlando. So all that development in Orlando is feeding into the Everglades, plus all the agriculture. So there has to be a lot of restoration upstream of the Everglades, as well as within the Everglades, filtering that water. So in Florida, we have a huge challenge with way too many septic tanks. So Florida is basically, at least the southern half, is a porous limestone peninsula, and septic leaches through that limestone pretty quickly. And we also have a lot of the water that comes into our coast, doesn't just come over the surface of land, it comes up through the groundwater. So for example, in the Gulf of Mexico, if you take all of the freshwater rivers that run into the Gulf of Mexico from Florida and take that volume, an equivalent of 30% of that volume comes up in groundwater into Tampa Bay. So we have to convert, it's an upstream thing, is to convert our septic to sewer to get those nutrients out of the system, which will help stop the algae blooms. So red tide, for example, has always been around, but it's much more frequent and intense and long lasting because of all the nutrients we're putting into the coastal system. Another problem we have in Florida, especially on the East Coast, I can speak to that personally, is our sewage treatment plants are decades out of date. If we get a heavy rain, they dump raw sewage in, which is more nutrients and everything else. We're finding out colleagues at FIU are finding, unfortunately, high levels of pharmaceuticals in bonefish in the Florida Keys.
Yeah.
And modern sewage treatment can remove those pharmaceuticals before the effluent comes out. It's just an investment. And so we see all of this as an investment in making the fisheries better, but also all of our coastal habitats and Florida tourism. The recreational saltwater fishery in Florida is worth over $8 billion a year. And the flats is a huge component of that.
Mm-hmm.
And so we consider it an investment. But these same kind of problems are happening, throughout the U.S. with water quality issues running downstream.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even way out on Cape Cod, can't escape it. Places like Pleasant Bay are having some huge nutrient issues right now because of the same type of thing, septic systems. The cool thing about all that, and I don't want to be too a downer here, is all of this is fixable.
Yeah.
We know everything I told you is based on science. We know all the science. We know the solutions. We know the illness that the patient has. So unlike our present world with COVID, where we don't know all those answers, with habitat restoration and fish depending on habitats, we know the answers. We have the data. We're getting more data to push it even harder. So now it all comes down to political will. And that's what's great about AFTA hosting these kinds of conservation on the couch, is the only way it's going to change is if the people who are watching this and the people that they fish with, the friends they fish with, make themselves the squeaky wheel. Fishermen are individuals, right? You don't want to go out and fish with 30 of your best friends. You might all go fishing, but you go somewhere and then talk at the end of the day. But we have to be able to organize better than we're organizing now, because we should have a much bigger voice. And so we're hoping that some of the stimulus money from the COVID bills that are coming through Congress help with some infrastructure improvements, like sewage and septic and roads and everything that will improve water quality and help out our fisheries. Not just bonefish, tarpon, and permit, but trout and salmon and everything else we fish for.
Yeah, thank you. That's an awesome answer to that question. I didn't quite realize to the extent. I mean, I know about Okeechobee being the Everglades, but I didn't realize quite to the extent of how septic and sewage and all of that was such a huge driver of habitat loss. That's really fascinating.
Yeah, I remember fishing. It's the Four Seasons Resort, I think, up there in Orlando. They used to have an Orvis shop in that.
Yeah.
That ran it in the hotel. And I remember going out and fishing in that water coming out of the ground right there, and like that's where the water comes from. That's where it all kind of starts,
Yeah.
It's crazy. Just
it
in
is.
terms of the interconnectivity of all of that is pretty profound. So
Here's another crazy statistic. So about 1,000 people a day move to Florida.
really?
Think about that. We've got this epic fishery. We've got all this great stuff going on. We've got this super fragile ecosystem, and we have a ton of people moving here every day. So, as the science continues to grow and as the population continues to grow, we hope to enhance and build on the relationships that we've made within the state, within state agencies, within our different research circles, and have a stronger influence. But I think a perfect example of all this kind of stuff coming together was the water quality crisis. When you have big floating turds, for lack of a better word, going by with green algae and blue-green algae and red tide and all this other stuff, people get really mad. When people start losing money, it becomes a bigger issue. And unfortunately, I think Aaron is the first person I heard say this, the Everglades is dying a death by 1,000 cuts. We're not seeing a giant blue-green algae bloom all the time. It might be somebody with a bad septic tank here, or some type of spill here, or somebody digging for phosphate and not doing the right thing with their waste there. And, over time and just the large population boom, people want to live down here because it's nice and we've got tarpon, and, it's probably a little bit nicer right now than it is in Montana. No offense, guys. I love Montana.
Well, that's only one person on this call, so that's okay.
Sorry, man, I didn't mean to call you out.
It's pretty nice today.
So something that I think is important, and that we really try to harp on all these calls, and I think you bring up something important, Mark, is that if we as anglers can organize to the extent that we need to, and Paul and I see this as an opportunity to do that and to grow this coalition.
And Ben too. Don't leave
and
out
Ben as well.
And Brian.
Ben, you're there. Everyone's there. Yeah, just calm down. You're on the call. God dang it. What I see is okay. That's 1,000 new opportunities a day for advocates. And if we can advertise, yes, if we can advertise how badass everybody is and what they're doing and the importance of being responsible and what that means and how it doesn't take a ton of stuff to do that, I think, that kind of growth lends itself to the political will that Aaron's talking about. Because if someone comes in from somewhere else and doesn't necessarily understand the issues, but wants to stay in Florida because it's beautiful and for all the other reasons, to me, that's a ready-made advocate who hasn't been, who hasn't been entrenched in, all the BS that comes with a lot of these politicized issues. And so, I mean, if we can continue to do this, conservation from the couch and other things like it to bring all these voices together, I see, yes, it's hard on everything for that kind of growth to take place and it be sustainable. But I also think that you have a lot of opportunity there. And so that, to me, is sort of that silver lining that Andy talked about.
Yeah. I like that, Lucas. It's like a Tammany Hall approach to Florida. When they get off the boat at Ellis Island back in the day, they just sign them up to be members of the Democratic Party in New York. And I think you guys just need to, anytime somebody moves to the state, they become an automatic BTT member.
Good.
I would also advocate, though, that those people that we want to convert and have a stronger voice need to have the language and understand the importance of like an evidence-based approach as opposed to just anecdotes, right? And I think that goes back to having the science as the foundation for, whether you're going up to your legislature or you're having a conversation with a bunch of guides or you're at a bar. We have to work on sort of translating the science, making it accessible. And also I talk about this a lot when we're thinking about best practices for catch and release. It's that consistent and persistent message and having it based on science. Because, things will drift if we let them. And so, as long as if everybody is beating the same drum and telling the same story, then it's much more powerful, right? I think that's where, organizations like BTT, that make the connection, that take the science and make it accessible is important.
Yeah, and I want to add one thing too, and this is, I've dealt with this in the outdoor world, where the outdoor industry loves to tout its economic power just from the size of it. But Mark, I don't know, you referenced how big fishing is in the state of Florida. Was it, say, 8 billion or something?
8 billion a year.
$8 billion. I want to guess it's bigger than sugar.
It is.
Okay, so
much.
But who has the political power?
Right.
Well, yeah, Big Sugar, the fan holes, I forget the time period, but just in publicly available contributions to politicians in a couple decades, it was like $50 million.
Right. So I think
I literally learned about a thing called the Iron Triangle in political science that's based on political power, and the sugar lobby was the example
and that's right. That's the ultimate example of that. But I think what everybody's talking about here in terms of how we all get together is that ultimately we have to have the political power, and we need to make our voices heard to the politicians and those people that it's important, not just because, hey, we have an 8, but we've got to have the political will to make this happen, because ultimately it's important for not just us, but as an indicator of, how we're going to live on this planet moving forward. So it's a really good analogy for a lot of things. And if you look at, like we talked about steelhead, and what I love about this whole conservation from the couch is the thread that's been connected. Like we've been talking about issues, but you hear the same story from the striper guys, the redfish guys, the steelhead guys, and now here we are on the last show, we're talking about the same dynamics, is that you can look at that and you can go, that's the connectivity that we need to work on, because that's how we're going to be successful ultimately.
That's one of the beauties of people who've had the chance to go flats fishing in Cuba, right? Their approach is to make these marine protected areas that are catch and release only, except for lobster harvest, which is pretty tightly regulated. And in these areas, not only the catch and release, but there's no pollution. There's no nutrient laden freshwater runoff or factories or raw sewage or anything like that. And the habitats in those areas are astounding.
They're pristine. Pristine.
Yeah, as close as you're going to get. I mean, I remember talking to Lefty, and he said that's what the Florida Keys was like in 1965 or whatever it was. And again, it's not that we can't get that back. We can. We just have to make it enough of a priority to push for it.
No, that's what we do, though, right? What do? We go to Cuba. We go, like, I'm a steelhead fisherman. I can't catch steelhead here. So what do? I go to British Columbia. I go catch them up there because they've got them there. It's like, bottom line was like, we got to take care of our own backyard.
We do.
Let's make it happen.
One of the things I think I'm proud of with what we're doing at BTT is, we've started this education initiative. And so we've bottled some of this stuff that Aaron and Andy have been working on. And, if you listen to Aaron long enough, you can't bottle all of it because there's just not a big enough bottle. But we've distilled it into a nice format that teachers can actually use. And it checks all the boxes for Common Core. It involves, learning through electronic devices and all the fun buzzwords in education that people are using these days. And we're rolling it out in Monroe County schools, eventually Miami-Dade County schools, through FWC camps to just get kids, ages, K through 8 started with their base level of scientific knowledge from the lens of bonefish, tarpon, and permit. And then when they can grow up and see that, their backyard is extremely valuable due to the fish swimming in it and not necessarily because of the real estate value, but that's oftentimes dictated from the fish swimming in it. It kind of gives them a better lens for how important these species are and how good it is we have it in Florida and some of these other places.
It's actually a mark that a lot of those lessons, even though they're from 4th or 2nd grade and up, will actually be pretty educational for a lot of anglers.
Yeah.
And
Got to be kindergarten level, I'm afraid.
And politicians.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
That's something that we haven't actually touched on in all of these that I'm surprised that we kind of forgot is, the whole premise of this thing is what can you do from your couch? Obviously this is not directly from your couch, but is take a kid fishing. Like take someone who is your nephew or niece or, someone, your neighbor's kids, whatever it is, and get them to the water. So one of the things that I find amazing with the Black Mangrove Project that I do here is that we have kids from the local high school go out and plant these things and they grow them in their greenhouses. And these kids live 10 minutes from coastal Louisiana, and a majority of them have never been in a boat. And that is something that when you see them experience this fishery for the first time at 15, 17 years old, and they see the importance, the fragility, all those things, it's a light bulb that goes off, and they go home and they tell their parents, what can we do to save this? And that's something that I think, we as advocates, we're constantly banging our heads against the same voters, against the same politicians. You know what? Let's just undermine this thing from the ground up. Let's educate the kids like y'all are saying. And again, they're going to vote soon. And when they do, we'll have a whole new membership group of little ass kickers. And so kudos to y'all for that, because that's something that I've found the community outreach part of advocacy, I think sometimes is lost at an age range. Like we focus so hard on the people out there doing it today. And we always talk about the future, and yet we don't always focus on the future of the fishery and those who are participating in it. And so, something else to do from your house or close by, take a kid fishing, get them out there to experience that visceral response that we all have whenever you touch a fish for the first time or you catch a fish for the first time. Every one of us can attest to that being a life-altering experience. And so,
yeah, we're going to get Mark out on the water soon so he can touch his first fish.
One day, man. One day.
With that stash, I think he's enraging to get out there.
But on the education side,
Cuba, though.
On the education side, we started talking about homeschooling the kids. We did just have our lesson plans, I think 10 of them from 2nd through 12th grade, certified by CPOMs for Florida standards. And you can go onto our website under education and click those. And actually, you know, something that you'd enjoy and understand more than the kids, Lucas.
Yeah, I'd be into it for sure.
Teach why,
Better
man.
than geography.
But also kind of circling back on talking about the water quality issues and all that type of thing. Often when we bring that up, people start talking about politics, but this is entirely nonpartisan. I mean, this is about, you know, the future of the fishery, and even bigger, the future, as Brian said, the future of ourselves, of our coastal habitats, you know, where we're working. You know, the blue-green algae, for example, in Southeast Florida, that was such a bad issue 2 years ago. That's a neurotoxin. There are long-term implications for people exposed to that. And that's still in the system, and people are still eating those fish. And they're doing health studies in Florida, they were before COVID, looking at those impacts, right? So it's not just about the fish, it's much broader. So it's not a partisan issue, but because of the way our system works, it is a political issue. And so, you know, just kind of cast aside party allegiance. And this happened in Florida's last election. The fishing community got super involved.
Yeah, they did.
And they swayed,
yeah.
they swayed some of our offices, focusing on the Everglades, or focusing on, you know, agriculture, reduction in nutrients, that type of thing. So it can be done without thinking about party politics, but it's not going to happen, and people get involved. Yeah, Ben.
Hey, Aaron, just a quick question. Does BTT do like a hands-on, like week-long science class for people to come to?
No, that's a great idea. We certainly could and should. Right now, it's you know, it's about capacity.
Yeah.
But we're in the process of ramping up our education program, and that is one of the things on our list to do. Everything from summer camps for kids to field trips for kids to more extended type of things.
Yeah.
Or
And
summer,
there is
Involve
always
fishing.
or
a
summer camp for adults.
symposium coming up too.
Yeah,
though.
adults.
Yeah, adult
Yeah.
summer.
Let me in.
No, adults for sure. I mean, it's interesting. We used to do hosted trips to fishing lodges, as an
That's
example,
right.
where people would go fishing during the day, of course, but in the evenings we'd always have kind of informal conversations, kind of, I don't know, what would you call them, Andy? Guided lectures kind of things.
Yep.
Andy does this stuff too, right? So you get the science, you also get the fishing. We take Mark along, so somebody gets to fish with him or has to fish with him each day. We rotate him to spread the pain.
It's like Make-A-Wish.
Make a nightmare.
So maybe a thing to do, Ben, is to partner with AFTA to start doing some of those in different locations. You know, in Florida and the Bahamas.
Yeah, we
wherever.
could definitely do something like that, especially teaming up with some of our travel partners that have just been crushed during this time. Could be a great way to get those, you know, some of their clients involved as well, and learn the science behind the fish that they you know, travel around the globe to chase.
Yeah.
There's a lot that comes out of the symposium too, right? That happens every 3 years, and it's, you know, it's an international science symposium, but like we strongly encourage the scientists to kind of ditch a lot of the science speak and, you know, to make their presentations more accessible. There's inclusion, you know, it includes guides, it includes the industry, it includes, you know, pretty much anybody under the sun. And, you know, that's a way that acts as a really good way to get the science out there in a way that can be used for the grassroots movements, and empowering people to kind of have that sort of common voice to push for a greater difference. So, and there are ways, I mean, you know, I think sometimes looking back what Mark said about the BTT journal, you know, a lot of the science that's done gets captured in the journal articles, and those are available on the website. So, you know, and that's, you know, not the boring scientific papers that Aaron and I write a lot of and nobody really likes to read.
Speak for yourself.
Wow.
You got to pay for those things too if you want to
Wasn't
read
gonna
them.
say anything.
I got to pay to read this stuff I can't even understand.
So to continue what Andy was saying about the symposium, this is one of those shows that's continued to grow over the years, and it's gotten insane. It is a ton of fun. If you're into flats fishing at all or want to be, or have any question about any kind of fish, location, rigging, flies, spin, whatever you can think of, this is the place to be. So at this point, we still are on this fall. I know there's a lot of different opinions on events. We still have enough time that we're going to make a final call at the end of summer, but at this point, we're still pushing forward. And it's going to be November 13th and 14th down here in Weston, Florida, which is basically Fort Lauderdale. So it's a real easy drive from the airport. We had about 60 different vendors there, a lot of the same vendors that are supporting this fine program. So thank you. And we hope to have them all back again this fall. It's one of those events that there's really just nothing like it out there. There's industry shows, there's scientific symposiums, and there's not really ever been a sort of hybrid event like this before. And it's really fun to get a lot of scientists and a lot of flannel wearing, beard growing industry bros in a room and feed them a lot of beer and see what happens. And what's great is that we not only get these really, really well put together scientific reports from guys like Andy and some of our other collaborating scientists, but we also have really cool, casting demonstrations. We have casting demos with guys like, lesser known guys like Steve Huff, Andy Mill, just low key guys that still kind of up and coming in the flats fishing world. But no, we're just really fortunate. It's a ton of fun, and we're hoping that all of the Rona stuff is under control so that we can go ahead and do that this fall and get everybody there and have a big party and laugh at how weird this year has been so far. And registration is open on the BTT website, in case you're wondering and want to know more.
Well, do we want to talk a little bit about things that people can do from their couch, since that seems like a pretty good little transition you did there, Mark?
Sure.
We're coming on an hour and 11 minutes now, so want to try to get to some of these questions we got too.
Yeah, well, I'll keep talking there, and I'll let Aaron and Andy follow up. We're in a very weird situation right now in terms of the world. If you guys haven't noticed, it's a little strange out there. Some of the things you can do, most of it all lives on the BTT website. So if you don't have one of our journals that are complimentary, you can actually head to the site and download any of the journals that we've ever produced. They're all in PDFs, and there's lots of great ways to view those. And as Andy mentioned, those are sort of the scientific highlights of what we've done over the years. We also have a ton of great interest articles on guys like Stu App and Steve Huff and Andy Mill and all of our favorite flats fishing friends. The other thing you can do is if you have kids at home, get them tuned in with some of these educational materials that Aaron mentioned before. We've got all these great resources online. If your kids are really sick and tired of learning about the life cycles through other boring species, bring them in and learn about how tarpon interact with the fish around them. So that's another option. And, the other thing is, we are a group that we're completely reliant on human interest and human support to survive. So, in times like this, there's no federal bailout for what we're doing. So, we're relying on anglers. We're relying on folks that sort of want to keep this journey going into finding out more about these species. So if you're able to support your local guides, support your local shop, if you have a little bit extra, support your local conservation group saving tarpon, we would really appreciate it. And we appreciate all the folks that have helped keep this thing going for 20 plus years.
I'd also say if you go to btt.org, our website, right there on the top of the front and center on the main page is a link for you to put in your 2 cents about our effort to make habitat the focus in Florida. And you don't have to be a resident of Florida. Actually, maybe better if you're not. If non-residents who come to Florida to fish the flats, let FWC and our governor and others know that they'll stop coming to Florida if we don't get our act together. That's going to have a lot of influence, because tourism is basically what makes Florida tick. And as Mark said, helping us out by becoming a member is huge, but also telling other people about what you've heard today, what you learn on our website and from our journals. If you get to the symposium, word of mouth is the best advertisement still, even in the day of social media, whether you do it person to person or on your Facebook or Instagram, whatever the case may be. Yeah, get active and get loud and start sharing the information and helping everybody out.
Yeah, I would kind of second that, or maybe third it, in terms of like keeping the conversation going, and using this as an opportunity to learn. If you're trapped and not able to get on the water and still, jonesing and to think about fish and stuff like that, like, now's the time to absorb information, and to, think about, using that as a catalyst also to like feel inspired and not give up hope. I mean, we talked about a lot of like downer things today about habitat destruction and climate change and all that stuff. But, there are success stories out there. And, we say, if you go outside of the Southeast United States, Brian and I know about this. We hung out in Christmas Island for a little while, and, you look back in the day and, the bonefish stocks there got pummeled because of netting. And they stopped netting, and the bonefish stocks are now back, right? So there are ways to demonstrate that if you can advocate for change, fish populations will rebound, depending on what insults are impacting them. I think that there is hope, and I think that keeps us. I mean, as anglers, we're always hopeful, right? Because we lose our minds if we didn't hope that we're going to catch something. And the other push that I always kind of include is that as we're waiting for some of these big juggernauts to move forward in terms of habitat protection and other bigger policy things, I always push, and a lot of the science I've done with colleagues like Steve Cook and other folks is looking at catch and release. People are getting ready to get back on the water, and they're going to interact with those fish, whether they're spawning or migrating or whatever, thinking about those best practices for catch and release, because if we can minimize the impacts on each one of those fish, that means those fish stay in the water, they're spawning, they're moving, and I think it's not, it's not one or the other. We've got to protect habitat, but we got to protect those fish that we have in the water right now. So,
Andy, is there a place that people can go to learn about how to properly handle fish and the importance of keeping fish wet?
Yeah. So yeah, exactly. So that's a good plug for the Keep Fish Wet, or Keep Them Wet. We're going through a bit of a rebranding, but there's going to be a lot of information on that website that talks about the principles and tips for best practice for catch and release. There's been a ton of science done on catch and release for bonefish. And so again, sort of quantifiable evidence of how we should handle them and how we should not, and what those impacts are. We know less about, we've done less science on tarpon in terms of catch and release and on permit, but there's some general principles that definitely apply. So,
awesome. Got some questions, guys?
Pretty good. We've been kind of plugging them away along the way, so I don't see anything new. There was some questions about does treated sewage pumped under coral as it perks up contribute to algae growth? I'm gonna assume that. I think that was directed to Adam.
Yes, a lot. Any extra nutrients that go into, especially a naturally low nutrient system like the subtropics or the tropics, you don't need much in the way of nutrients to have algae blooms.
I can actually attest to that with that blue thing right back there, because my phosphates right now are 0.03 parts per million. And if you get anywhere above that, algae starts to grow. So yeah, the coral reefs are super low nutrients, super low nitrates, super low phosphates, and sewage is packed full of that stuff. I mean, that's all it is. So.
Yeah, and even so it doesn't take, the analogy I use is people who like chocolate, right? If I give you a chocolate bar, you're pretty psyched. Now, if I put down 75 pounds of chocolate in front of you and say, eat that now, you're going to get sick.
I would
and it's the same thing with nutrients. A little bit is good and appropriate, but too many, and it pretty much kills the system, makes it extremely sick.
This is one for you, Lucas, from Crawford. What have been the commonalities y'all have seen? You said y'all, actually.
Hey.
Between stripers, redfish, steelhead, and tarpon.
I don't think we could have hammered it any more at this point,
Right?
which is great because that's what we're doing.
Exactly.
It's that the commonality is all the same stuff, no matter where you are, no matter whether you're fishing in saltwater, you're fishing in freshwater in some instances, you're on the West Coast, East Coast, or the Gulf of Mexico. It is all the same. Habitat, climate, fisheries issues through management. All of this stuff is exactly the same. It may look slightly different in that you're in a different place and it's a different species, but predator-prey relationships, habitats for them to grow up, and then the way that we handle them as anglers and the way they're taken out of the system is across the board the same no matter where you go.
Right.
Yeah, that's also interesting, kind of circling back to what Andy was saying earlier about fish recovering. Chesapeake Bay back in the 70s into the 80s was a trash pit. It was a cesspool.
Yeah.
The stripers collapsed in part because of overfishing, but in part because nothing they spawned survived. And so they put a moratorium on all harvest of striped bass in most places, and they spent decades fixing the bay. And the bays took 40 years, but they're actually seeing seagrass levels that they used to see. And oysters are starting to do a bit better. And fisheries management aside, the striped bass population did a pretty good job recovering based upon a lot of those water quality improvements. So yeah, if we do the right thing, things will improve, which brings up another point. And Lucas, you kind of referred to this earlier, talking about the kids. The fisheries that we're fishing for now, especially with tarpon, because they live so long, are the result of what people were doing 20, 30, 40 years ago. Mm-hmm. And so that means that what we're doing now could benefit us, but even more importantly, again, sticking to tarpon, people 20, 30 years from now are going to be fishing for what we leave them. Mm-hmm. Right? The fish that are getting born now are going to be in those big fish in the fishery in 20 years. Right? Tarpon get mature, sexually mature between about 8, maybe 14 years old. Right? So a 60-pound fish is probably 8 years old. So think about what happened 8 years ago. This is what made that fish more of that size fish or fewer of that size fish. And if we're talking about fish that are 120, 150 pounds, it's even a longer time frame. So it's really important. It's not just now, but what we do now is kind of our legacy. Right? So I think we need to think about it that way as well.
Yeah. That's crazy that those fish get 60 pounds in 8 years, but then live 80 years. Like they must get to a certain size and then just keep on trucking.
Well, that's typically what happens with fish. There's a rapid growth, and then they kind of slow down, and they'll get maybe girthy instead of longer. So like
you're familiar with some of them will
just
right?
get super
I'm in the
fat.
girthy phase right now.
Yeah.
At 40, I'm girthy. I'm getting girthy.
I thought that was dad bod.
It's all that chocolate you keep feeding me, Aaron.
He's put on the COVID-19 for sure.
Oh, 20 plus.
Striped bass is another example, right? They get to a certain age, and even the big females, they get past reproduction age. They don't even spawn anymore, but they're massive as far as girth goes, but they're not going to get much longer. So that's pretty common for fish to have that kind of growth pattern.
Makes
so yeah,
sense.
It's a
the
legacy.
least amount of time you're vulnerable, the better.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, this is sort of not conservation entirely related question, but I'm just curious, as somebody who doesn't fish for these fish very often, if you could have your like epic dream day of fishing, and it'd be an epic bonefish day, an epic tarpon day, or an epic permit day. No grand slams here. What's your? I'm just curious for everybody. What's your dream day?
Oh, that's a hard one.
Well, for me, for bonefish, low tide,
Well, no. But you got to just choose between like having an epic bonefish day, an epic permit day, or an epic tarpon day.
Oh shit.
Come on.
Well, we don't want to be here till 10, Aaron. So
That's-
we had to give you one.
That's like asking a parent who's their favorite kid.
Yeah.
I have one, so I can tell you it's him.
I guess I'd say tarpon. I mean, bonefish for me are kind of the gateway drug. I love them.
Yeah.
But
You did learn about drugs from him, didn't you, Mark?
I told you. I thought I was the bad guy here. No.
Tarpon fever, man. You get that. You get once you get a big tarpon, it's game over.
Well,
But there's also so many different ways and places you can fish for tarpon.
Yeah.
You fish for them. I mean, here in Central Florida, we're coming up any moment now for tarpon pushing bait right up against the sand. I can stand on dry sand. And
I saw that video today.
Yeah.
yeah, that's pretty insane, huh? And then I can get in my skiff and go sit on the edge of a sandbar and cast a cruising fish or go out. So yeah, the epic day, dawn patrol, getting the bloopers in the morning.
Yeah.
Fishing the beach in the evening, and in between, staking out on a sandbar.
I'll tell you, my favorite day is when you're set up somewhere anchored and you can see fish coming from like 300 yards away and just a huge school of them, and they're coming right towards you, and you get those. That's when your blood pressure rises and you start screwing up casts big time.
Buck fever.
Yeah. It's when you have enough time to get nervous, get okay, get nervous, get okay, and then just shit the bed.
And also with tarpon, you can the times when you can see the eat, right? And with bonefish, you see it a lot. I mean, bonefish are near and dear to my heart because they're their first flat species, and you can definitely see a bonefish like homing in on a fly and hit it, But it's I think because of the size of tarpon and the big eye and like to be able to see the eat, right? And just like, whoa, like you just heart's pounding, right?
Then it's 50-50 chance after that, if that.
Well, and then it's the last 20 feet, right? Bring them to the boat. It's like you fight it and you fight it. It's just like, it's a crapshoot when you have that last 20 feet. And
I
so
talked to someone today that jumped 13 yesterday. And out of the 13, they got
be tagging more of those pigs.
They got 3 almost to the boat, but couldn't even leader them. All 13 of them.
Yeah. So for the acoustic telemetry project, we've tagged 170. We've probably jumped like 600. And got them 20 feet to the boat, probably 400 or 500. Right. And it's just like it's a numbers game. You can't get some of those big pigs.
So I had a question. Is it true that the bonefish is the rich man's carp?
I'll take it. Yeah, sure.
I would say it's the intelligent man's carp.
Okay, there you go.
Like,
is there any grounding for that conversation? Is that even realistic? Like, is it are they kind of related?
No.
No, I didn't think so.
Not even close.
Not even close.
Exactly. So let's just cut that out right now.
I mean, Brian, I was joking around with you yesterday. I mean, I started shad fishing in the Potomac, and everybody was calling it the poor man's tarpon.
Poor man's tarpon.
It's like that's
what we call ladyfish.
Yeah,
at least they're related. At least they're related.
They're related.
I tell you something about a tarpon that you were talking about that is always impressive to me is that when they get tunnel vision and they're going to eat, for that split second, they forget they're scared of everything. And then the second they eat, they remember they're scared of everything and they haul ass. Like that, it's that moment when their brain switches back from like, I'm a predator to, oh wait, at some point I was prey, let me go. And that's something I've always appreciated about such a giant fish. That's basically just a bait fish. I mean, it's just a giant bait fish. Any fish that's scared of its own shadow and free jumps is a funny fish.
It's interesting you say that, Lucas. I mean, you go to some places where they haven't really seen anglers, and they don't show that.
Really?
Yeah, it's hard to
human influence.
Yeah, I think so. I think a lot of it is having fished for heavily pressured fish and then fish that haven't really seen anglers.
Yeah, the fish in Cuba act completely different than the fish in the Keys.
Right, or Central America. Andy fished in Central America, Costa Rica. I mean, there's a different behavior. Look at a fish that'll swing on a fly 2 or 3 times if he misses it.
I will say we had one on Saturday that did about a backflip to come eat a fly. As it was going away. I mean, the fly was headed towards it and it was going away.
The ultimate, like, you can't do this with tarpon. Don't ever do this with tarpon.
I like that my buddy is like, you're just an a-hole, man. That doesn't count. That's not.
Well, I don't know if you listened to the last one, Mark, but Lucas told the story of his first steelhead. He hadn't even made a cast yet. He was just dragging the fly through the river on his way out, and he caught one. So then he fished for 2 days and didn't catch one.
4 days.
4 days.
That's like permit, right? You'll have people go and catch a permit on their first trip and then never catch one again.
The other thing that amazes me with tarpon is like they eat the smallest little things. Like you think the worm hatch is going on right now, right? I just got word of it last night. But they're so small, but they eat them like M&Ms. It's this aphrodisiac, and they go crazy over them. But it's amazing to see 150-pound fish chase a worm.
Striped bass, big striped bass do the same thing up in New England.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Rhode Island ponds,
Yes.
coastal ponds, Rhode Island. And
Well, you can catch 24-inch brown trout on the reef with a size 24 WD-40.
Yeah.
I think in the relative terms, it's about the same thing.
But you need half a chicken to catch a muskie for some reason. So.
Exactly.
You need a wet mop with fluorescent colors.
Make muskie eat again.
All right, fellas. Well, what do you think? We're
we're there.
Yeah.
We're there. The light on my fish tank goes off. That is the indicator to end all.
I was going to ask, Lucas,
Come on, a timer?
For the last 20 people on the call, maybe we need to do a tour of the fish tank since it's been
lights are
prominent.
out. Lights are out. We'll have to do it on the next one.
well, and
everybody that hung in there for us for the duration.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody. And we end this one, at least I do. Make sure that you go to your local fly shop.
Yeah.
Buy equipment from your local fly shop. If you don't have a local fly shop in your area, look online. Look for an independent specialty retailer. They need your help right now. Yeah, and the same with a guide. If you have the opportunity to go out with a guide, go and fish with a guide. It will go a long way, and you'll learn a lot from your local guide.
And that's actually something that I was thinking about with Bonefish and Tarpon Trust. It would be really cool maybe to start like a little mini guide school of all the things that we talked about. And because look, as guides, we have a captive audience for the day. And so I take every opportunity to try and educate people on the issues that we face here in Louisiana. And I'm sure a lot of people in Florida are doing the same thing. But unfortunately, what happens is there's sometimes people, maybe don't quite understand it or don't feel comfortable talking about it, or even sometimes just don't have the best information. And so I think it would be really neat to kind of start, a similar education program to what you're doing with the kids for guides, and that way everybody's on the same page and it's a unified message, if nothing else. So,
and we do have a conservation captain program that currently lists. It's on our website as well. So if you are looking for a guide to book and you are looking for guides that are affiliated with scientific research and BTT, go to our website and there's a whole list of them. And there's lots of different regions too. I mean, it's everywhere from Texas to the Keys, Bahamas, Cuba, Belize, Mexico, Southeast, everywhere. So there's all kinds of folks helping us out. And if we can help steer some people their way, like you said, these are the folks that are informed, and, we'd love to, include more guides on that list as well and get people up to speed with what's going on. So I'm glad you mentioned that. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries.
Perfect.
Well,
Brian, closing statements for Mr. Bennett.
No, it's kind of bittersweet. Like I said in the beginning, this has been a really good exercise. It was a great group to kind of wrap it up with. I think it puts a bow on the whole conservation from the couch concept. And I'm looking forward to kind of seeing how we can continue to grow this thing. And, the connections we've made, I think some good things are going to come out of this. And that's what makes it all worthwhile. So thanks, everybody.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate the time. Thanks for all the work that you're doing to make these fisheries great. So I really appreciate it.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you guys for your time. Really
Take care, everybody.
Y'all have a good evening.
Cheers.